If you're starting a ketogenic diet or you're dipping your toe back in the water with it, you may want to stop for a second because some of the literature has changed. And I know that's frustrating. It's frustrating for me too. Like if you go away and then you come back, you're like, what changed? Did Thomas completely like go a different direction? No, I just follow this science closely. So like one of the things that's really been interesting is the whole world of like monounsaturated fats versus saturated fats on a ketogenic diet, but also like where we get our unsaturated fats compared to like seed oils, other things. It's really wild and it's really fascinating. So we're gonna dive into it. I promise I'll make this video simple and easy because it's gonna be great for someone that is starting out, that has never heard anything about a ketogenic diet, but it's also gonna be great for people that are coming back to it and wanna learn where to go now. So let's go ahead and break it down. Now, the first thing that I'm gonna go through is kind of the basics. You may wanna skip through it, but at the same time, I recommend that you watch just as a refresher. The focus of a ketogenic diet is to drive up ketones. It is not to just alienate carbs, okay? It's to drive up ketones because ketones have potency when it comes to changing our cellular function. They have potency when it comes down to potential anti-inflammatory effects, neuroinflammatory effects. They can be neuroprotective. I work with US Special Forces, specifically the Army and a little bit with the Air Force TACP guys, on how to use a ketogenic protocol for TBI, how to use a ketogenic protocol for cognitive function. This is something that's very real and very much so in the science. Okay, it's not something that's just a fad diet, but I want to teach you some of the things that we've learned recently. What I want to make sure is clear. One of the most important things with doing a ketogenic diet properly now is keeping oxidative stress low. One of the things that we've learned through years of ketogenic diet research is being on a ketogenic diet can increase oxidative stress, especially temporarily. So what we want to do is we want to get adjusted to it and add things into our diet that can help modulate that. So that's kind of the name of the game this year. Now, if you're using a ketogenic diet for fat loss, you still are wanting to drive up those ketones as high as possible. You just want to be doing so with the right kinds of food. So we'll get into all that. Number one priority for this year, micronutrition matters. I think the reason that the ketogenic diet kind of ended up falling by the wayside is because so many people were promoting a really dirty version of keto. Now, if you're new to the game, let me explain what that means. A dirty version of keto is going to In-N-Out Burger or going to McDonald's and getting a burger without a bun, still with the cruddy cheese, and just calling it a day and eating like that day in and day out and maybe just eating keto junk foods. That is no better than having processed foods in other ways. As a matter of fact, you could even make the argument that junk food on keto could even be worse than regular junk food. You're substituting one thing, sugar, for another thing, ultra-processed oils and refined things like that. So it's kind of like, where do you stand, right? They're both problematic. So what I want you to focus on is whole foods as much as possible. 12 years ago, when I did the ketogenic diet and lost a bunch of weight, lost 100 pounds, I was using a whole foods approach because there wasn't a lot of ketogenic foods out there yet. So lots of ground beef, I was eating broccoli, it was just basic. Okay, we need to go back to basics and think whole foods as much as we can. If you cannot get micronutrition in from greens, from veggies, eat more things like ground beef, get the collagen. Ground beef has a lot of micronutrition in it. I consider it nature's multivitamin. So kind of lean into those kinds of things. Okay, don't go for the ultra processed garbage. Go for lean, wholesome food. Now, number two, if you're trying to use a ketogenic diet for fat loss, okay, the first basic thing, it's obvious. Keep the carbs as low as you possibly can. I don't need to get into any kind of granular detail there. Just keep them low, plain and simple. Okay, keep them low. But what I would recommend you do is occasionally cycle through what is called PSMF, protein-sparing modified fasting, with the ketogenic protocol. Meaning you sort of go high fat, then low fat keto. It works really well. So higher fat keto is just like your traditional keto, right? It's like keeping the fats pretty high, having the meat, having the veggies, but keeping the fats high and really indulging in those. Have those periods where you strip the fats away and you go really low fat and low carb. This did not catch on earlier on with the ketogenic community because it was very pro-fat, drive up ketones. We have to have periods where we drive up fats and ketones, and then we should have periods where we put ourselves into an extreme deficit and keep fats lower so the body has no choice but to start pulling from its own stored fat. So let's say, for example, your body gets really used to burning the fats that you consume. Okay, you drive in these fats and you drive up ketone levels. And then all of a sudden you abruptly stop and you just eat lean protein. the body is going to be very efficient at using those fats, but there's no fats coming in, so it starts pulling them from your body. Not to mention you're in extreme deficit, right? So what I would recommend is go like 1 week of relatively high-fat keto, still within a caloric range that's acceptable, and then go 3 or 4 days of protein-sparing modified fast, where it's high protein that's lean, lean chicken, lean turkey, lean fish, lean beef, eggs, but don't go too crazy with them. Maybe add more egg whites in, okay, and keep the carbs exceptionally low as well, and then bring it back up. And we'll talk a little bit more about what it looks like. From a macronutrient perspective, we are now sitting at about a 50% protein macro breakdown, meaning most of your calories are coming from protein. 50% of your calories should be coming from protein on a ketogenic diet now. Does that inhibit the formation of ketones? To a small degree, but it does not kick you out of ketosis. If anything, it just helps prevent muscle breakdown, which again, you look at guys like Dr. Rhonda Patrick and you look at people like Dr. Peter Attia, they will tell you straight up, hey, I stopped doing keto and fasting because it broke down muscle. If we keep protein high enough, that's not gonna be an issue, that's a moot point. But here's where things get really interesting, and that's the fat breakdown. It's probably the most interesting part of this video. Nowadays, we wanna go more like 20% of our fats from saturated fat, 20% from monounsaturated fat, and 10 to 15%, depending on where you're at, from polyunsaturated fats, but not from the form of like seed oils like some people might recommend. We're gonna talk about what this looks like. Okay, this a lot of times has to do with what's called the arachidonic acid chain and all this other stuff. We wanna keep certain fats kind of a little bit lower, but more importantly, we wanna consume fats that are gonna be the most efficient at driving up ketone levels. If we're eating a lot of protein, we're gonna suppress ketone formation a little bit. So we need to make that up somewhere by trying to drive up some of these ketones through different fats. There's strong evidence that suggests that most unsaturated fats, whether they're monounsaturated or polyunsaturated, will drive up ketones higher. Okay, that is one main focus if you're after like metabolic repair. Doesn't mean be afraid of saturated fats, it just means we need to strategically use poly and monounsaturated fats, but I'll explain what that really looks like. Okay, so first and foremost, your sources of monounsaturated fats are not what people always think. Yes, olive oil is great. Yes, macadamia nuts are great. Yes, some of these other things are great. But monounsaturated fat, I recommend you get it from eggs. Eggs are a significant source of monounsaturated fat. Fish is a tremendous source of polyunsaturated fat, and it's not a seed oil. Macadamia nuts, of course, are really low omega-6, okay, but they're a monounsaturated fat. Okay, eating duck with the skin is like 60% monounsaturated fat. Yes, there's saturated fat, but it's mostly monounsaturated fat. So go with things like even duck tallow, duck fat. Eat a duck breast with the skin. Go for it. Eat those kinds of meats. Pork, believe it or not, even like a pork loin is 45 to 50% monounsaturated fats. There is some evidence that pork might not be the highest quality fat, but still, if you're trying to drive up those unsaturated fats that get ketones up higher, those kinds of fats are great. Now, dark meat chicken can be good too. The problem is, depends on where you source the chicken. Duck is a little bit more controlled at smaller scale, so you're probably not getting crazy amounts of, weird stuff in it. Chicken, mass-produced, the dark meat might hold more of the weird stuff. But still, dark meat chicken is going to get you those monounsaturated fats. I just recommend you get your fat from sources like that. And that way you can kind of get your meat in and get it from a full, wholesome source without having to get it from like a keto treat that's loaded with sunflower oil or something like that. MCT oil is also huge for driving up ketones. So if you're eating a lot more saturated fat, you're eating a lot more meat and cheese, you may want to use MCT oil a little bit more to drive those ketone values up. I'm not talking about it from a health perspective, I'm talking about it from a pure ketone perspective. I do think there's evidence that when you start consuming a lot of these omega-6s, they do absorb into the cell membrane, right? And when you are on a ketogenic diet, the lion's share of your calories are fats. Well, I guess they're protein and fats. But that means that you're at much more risk for sort of damaging a cellular membrane with low quality fats. So what I recommend is you have good quality saturated fats, we'll talk about what those are, and you have about 20% of your fats being monounsaturated fat and about 10% coming from nuts and seeds and things like that. We have to look heavily at the gut, okay? The gut is where it all starts. And on a ketogenic diet, that's where people run into problems. The ketogenic diet can either be extremely gut healing or extremely gut deleterious, okay? It all depends on where you go with that. People aren't getting a lot of fiber in, they're not getting a lot of greens, that's one thing. But they're eating the wrong kinds of fats, they're eating the wrong kinds of foods in general, they're causing more inflammation, they're causing more oxidative stress, they're not actually letting their body really do what it's supposed to do in terms of healing, they're just adding more damage to it. That's the problem, right? So first and foremost, care about your microbiome. Whether you have fiber or not, your microbiome is critical. And we have evidence that suggests that independent of fiber, diet will influence your microbiome. There's no doubt about that, okay? So try to do something. Whether it's consuming goat milk kefir, whether it's consuming yogurt, whether it's consuming cottage cheese, drinking kefir, like water kefir, drinking kombucha, doing anything to kind of change the gut, adding a probiotic in. I put the link for my probiotic that I recommend all the time. You've heard me talk about it before, but on a lower carb ketogenic protocol, it's even better than it is on another protocol. That thing has changed my life. It's called Seed. So that link down below is a 25% off discount link. Really interesting. They actually came to me originally when I was doing keto a lot saying, hey, see how this impacts your ketogenic diet. And I never looked back after that, because when I go really low carb, I need the help with my gut microbiome. And I notice a shift in how I sleep. I notice a shift in my energy, definitely a shift in my bloating, my digestion, and how I handle fats, because I don't handle fats super, super well. Anyhow, so that link, 25% off. That is the best probiotic that I could ever recommend. It's the only probiotic I literally recommend. It's called Seed, and it's a 2-in-1 capsule inside of a capsule. So that link down below, in the top line of the description. If you're starting a ketogenic diet, that's definitely something you want to use. The next thing that's really important this year with keto is if you're gonna commit to keto, you have to either commit all the way and allow yourself to go long enough to where carbohydrates actually start to store in your muscles from other substrates. What that means is if you eat protein and fat long enough, your body will actually start to create carbohydrates from those. And you will actually restore muscle glycogen, and you will get strong, and you will have energy and stamina just like you did before keto. But you have to commit to that adaptation period for 60 or 90 days, period. If you're not willing to do that, you need to be only having your carbohydrates intra-workout for a while. That means during your workout, take a couple tablespoons of honey. There's something that's called the insulin-independent glucose uptake. And basically, it allows glucose to come into the muscle without insulin being present. So you could actually restore muscle glycogen and have more strength and more power, even on a ketogenic diet, by having carbs intra-workout up to about 50 grams without really having a negative impact. However, if you're not working out, you don't need carbs at all. You absolutely positively do not need to consume carbs. Your body will create the amount that it needs. If you are working out, you might feel more of a demand for it, mentally, possibly physically. So in which case you either have to accept the 60 to 90 day indoctrination kind of that happens, or have your carbs intra-workout. Okay, so that means it could look like this. Start the day fasted, go ahead and start your workout or something like that. Have a couple tablespoons of honey during your workout. And then after your workout, resume standard ketogenic protocol. Okay, keeping the carbs really low, keeping the fats high, keeping the protein high. Let's talk saturated fat and sources for just a second. Really important thing. I recommend a lot of your saturated fat come from dairy. We are seeing so much evidence now on the huge metabolic benefits of dairy, particular things like hard cheeses, aged cheeses, Pecorino Romano, Pecorino Sarna, different things like that, even Parmesan, these hard cheeses, okay, sharp cheddar, aged cheese, raw cheese, all these things are really good because they are stable fats for one, but they also contain something that is called a C15 fat, which I've talked about in other videos. I've had doctors come on talking about it. There is something that's called cellular fragility syndrome, and that is where your cells become so fluid and fragile. And this happens a lot on a ketogenic diet because people are consuming nothing but oils and bad fats all the time, right? They're just consuming keto junk, and it's literally making their cell membrane fragile and fluid. This means that it does not have the structure, and it can go through what's called ferroptosis. It can go through all different kinds of things where it essentially becomes dysfunctional. There is a fat that is in good quality cheese and good quality dairy called a C15 saturated fat, and it actually adds structure and scaffolding to the cell. Sounds like a small mechanistic thing, but we're seeing that it is one of the biggest deficiencies that is out there right now. It is the first clinical deficiency that's been discovered in 75 years, and it's because we're not getting enough good quality dairy fat, because we've stripped the fat out of everything, and now we're not getting the good quality dairy fat. So add those good, if you're gonna get saturated fats in, don't just get it from super fatty cuts of meat. That's only one kind of saturated fat. Just like there's more than one kind of carbohydrate, there's more than one kind of saturated fat. So get them in from different sources. Get aged cheeses, get goat cheese, okay, things like that. These are gonna be good sources of this. Secondly, if you're going to have dairy products, as much as you can, try to have A2 milk, okay? I recently came on the advisory board for a company called Pioneer Pastures. You've probably seen them at stores like Target and stuff like that now. Okay, they are really pushing the A2 movement, because what we're finding is that most milk, people, when they have digestive issues, it's not from the lactose more than likely, it's from the proteins, the beta-caseins, the BCM7. That causes digestive inflammation, that causes problems there potentially. We're seeing strong evidence. So point is look for A2 quality milk. I'm not going to say to drink particular raw products if you don't want to. That doesn't really matter in this case. I'm talking about the A2 variety breed of cow. So if you drink milk, which you probably wouldn't drink on a ketogenic diet anyway because it's pretty high carb, go for A2 variety. But even your cream, try to go for A2 whenever possible. If you're healthy metabolically and you're not dealing with insulin resistance, you're not in a metabolic dysfunction, you can have little bits of carbohydrates. I recommend doing it. That's what's different from a ketogenic diet before. I don't recommend loading up on carbs to try to restore glycogen, but I recommend occasionally having some things like honey, occasionally having some things like maple syrup in like 15, 20 gram carbohydrate boluses, right? Small amounts every other day or something like that. This improves what's called glucose tolerance, because if you don't use it, you lose it. So a lot of people went keto and they never touched a carb for 5 years. And then they had carbohydrates, their blood sugar spiked, they had all these problems. I recommend occasionally dipping your toe in the water so that you do not run into that problem. It sounds crazy, but it will allow you to lose more fat over the long term because you're not going to become glucose intolerant. You'll be able to have more stable physiological states of insulin sensitivity, and you'll be able to handle carbs when you do have them, because this isn't like a go on forever and never have a carb again. You will probably have some at some point in your life. You might as well establish that process where your body knows how to use it. As for the sweeteners, okay, people have been asking me, where do I stand with erythritol after all the literature? Erythritol is still fine. Those studies were very, very flawed. The xylitol study was also very flawed. Same study design, same research group. Okay, essentially that was reverse causation. Point is, I would not be concerned with erythritol or xylitol, even though those hit pieces went out. But I would focus more on monk fruit, on stevia, and obviously allulose. So if you're new to the ketogenic diet, allulose actually can modulate blood sugar. Allulose is very interesting because it will allow for it occupies the GLUT5 transporter. So essentially, it's occupying a transporter that would only get activated if blood sugar was high. So essentially what it's doing is it's bringing blood sugar down lower. Okay, so it's allowing for glucose to come lower, and it blocks some of the receptor or some of the transporter for fructose. So in essence, you're basically mimicking sugar and blocking the absorption of sugar. So if you do overeat any carbohydrates or sugar, have allulose come in for the rescue, and it can bring the glucose down and get insulin levels back up. It's also just a delicious sweetener, so it works really well on keto. The next thing that I want you to do is when you have keto cheats, make them within the ketogenic realm, meaning don't go splurge and have a bunch of carbohydrates. That's going to be problematic on a ketogenic diet. I recommend that you go ahead and you say, hey, I'm going to enjoy higher saturated fat than I would normally have. Okay, try to have something like, this is going to be my night to have a massive ribeye with some butter, and just make it a keto treat as it gets. Okay, but don't go overboard on things like keto snacks that are loaded with a bunch of cruddy, potentially oxidized oils. Okay, the name of the game now is clean keto and keeping oxidative stress low. So simply what I mean by that is when you have a cheat meal, keep it keto and keep it clean. Just enjoy the foods that might be higher calorie that you ordinarily wouldn't have. Again, the ribeyes, the full fat duck, everything like that. Let's talk supplements for just a second. There's a few things that have become exceptionally more important on a ketogenic diet. The first one, trimethylglycine, TMG. You've seen my videos on it. TMG is epic, epic, epic. Okay, TMG, also known as betaine, it is something that has shown in the research to be so powerful for both muscle building and fat burning at the literal same time, making it one of the most potent things that we could use on a ketogenic diet. We want to preserve muscle, we want to burn fat. So look into TMG, look at some of my videos on trimethylglycine. I can link out to them down below. It's very safe, very simple. It's a methyl donor, so it basically helps contribute to homocysteine being lower, homocysteine getting broken down into its excretable format, which is known as methionine. Complicated, but check it out. Creatine on a ketogenic diet has become even more important. Okay, now we are seeing research on creatine being anti-inflammatory, especially in the higher amounts, 5, 10, even 15 grams. Yes, you can retain some water from it, But in the grand scheme of things, you'll feel so much better. And it's potentially anti-inflammatory for the brain. So trust me, start adding more creatine, but do it little bits throughout the day. 2.5 grams here, 2.5 grams there. That way you're not having a big bolus of it, but you're getting up to like 5, 10, maybe even 15 grams of creatine per day, depending on your muscle mass. Yohimbine and rauwolscine. These are aggressive, they're intense, so you may want to kind of check with your doctor, do your due diligence there. But yohimbine and rauwolscine are alpha-2 adrenergic receptor agonists, which means it basically blocks the blocking of fat loss. So it unlocks the ability for your fat cell to release triglycerides, free fatty acids, and a glycerol molecule, and you ultimately burn more fat. It's like caffeine, but more intense with the fat burning without much more jitters. Okay, I would recommend going for rauwolscine, which is a more filtered, more clean version of yohimbine in essence. It also destroys your appetite, so you'll feel much better off not eating. Number 10 is an interesting one. If you have a good doctor, talk to them. Talk to them about what is called MOTS-C, M-O-T-S-C. It's a peptide, and it's an exercise mimetic. Well, sort of. It's actually what's released from the mitochondria when we exercise. We've seen in evidence that when you have people that don't exercise and then all of a sudden exercise, they have a release of this MOTS-C peptide. Now we're seeing that your doctor could potentially give you MOTS-C as a peptide, and it can help mitochondrial function and therefore help fat oxidation significantly. Everything with keto is about the mitochondria, all the way down to the ketone formation, down to the absence of glucose, down to fatty acid upregulation, PPAR alpha. All these things have to do with the mitochondria. So MOTS-C could very well be the best peptide you could explore. I have used it. Personally, I feel like it makes a ketogenic diet work even better. But again, a full disclaimer, these things are in experimental use only right now. Okay, so they're being studied in rodents, but there are doctors out there that you can talk to that can address if this is something that would be good for you or not. That's out of my wheelhouse. The last thing that I want to remind people of is that fiber is still relevant. I know there's so much anti-fiber stuff out there, but fiber produces butyrate. Butyrate will help with ketone formation. You have to choose. Do you either go zero carb, carnivore mode, or do you have enough carbs, or enough fiber rather, that you can get enough of that in? Because low fiber is arguably worse than no fiber. And low fiber is obviously worse than high fiber. So I recommend 30 to 35 grams of fiber. And yes, those carbohydrates do not count towards your carb count. Remember, the simple net carb equation is your total carbs minus your fiber minus your sugar alcohols. That's going to be your net carbs. And if you're exercising, that becomes even more of a moot point. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel, and I'll see you tomorrow. Hey, real quick, if you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button. We have videos every single day, and drop a comment for the algorithm so it makes the YouTube gods happy so they don't shut me down or do something crazy. They want you to talk, so talk, say anything, whatever, for the algorithm.